The Barbarian Betrayal, chapters 30 and 31, Forged by the Blade. So let me see if I've got this straight. Admiral Otsoa gave the Konhim leader what might charitably be called an assuaging look. You want to, in violation of our orders, I hasten to point out, chase after the trail elements of the Master's fleet and do what exactly? Giaj chuckled as he regarded his human subordinate. He had grown quite fond of her in the weeks they had worked together. In many ways, she reminded him of Helene Fujimoto, the same refusal to give an inch of ground, the same fiery spirit. The two had traded many a barb over the decades, and he had thoroughly enjoyed every engagement. Well, perhaps not when he had been her prisoner. He had less than fond memories of that time period. But he'd known from the beginning his proposal would not be an easy sell. Indeed, that was part of its allure. The challenge. Admiral, we know almost nothing of the Masters, and what little we do know is not only millennia out of date, but comes from a single source. As we prepare for Operation Phalange, that same lack of knowledge could well doom our efforts. If the plan fails, I doubt there will be much left for a second attempt. Look, I'm not disagreeing with you, Adelaide Otsoa replied. I'm just questioning the trade-off. Every time we've gone up against the Masters, we've suffered overwhelming defeats. What makes you think it will be any different this time? Because I believe the plan I have in mind shifts the odds in our favor, Giaj explained. Since the success of Operation Bankshot, the enemy has indeed set their course for Dzuj as we hoped. Once they arrive, we will lose any chance we have to gain intelligence. The time to strike is now, he thundered, pounding a fist into his palm. The Admiral looked over his proposal with a critical eye before leaning back in her chair. Dayaksh, this plan, in essence you're dangling bait in front of the Masters, hoping they'll take it. Indeed so, Giaj agreed. If they ignore the bait, we have lost nothing. If, however, they take it, we potentially gain an intelligence advantage. Uh-huh, she said. Kinda rough for the bait, though. His grin grew wider, as Otsoa groaned in sudden realization. Of course, I should have freaking guessed, she sighed. Trailing far enough behind the Master's armada to keep from tempting them to reverse course, it took time to gain the lost ground. Stern chases were long chases by definition, but within a day the recon element had drawn close enough to have them within their sights. Minnow to Buenos Aires. I am ready to begin my run, Giaj reported, as Admiral Otsoa came on. I don't suppose another lecture about arrogant old fools trying to get themselves killed would do any good? She asked in resignation. The Dayaksh just chuckled. Admiral, by all rights I should have died 30 years ago at Zaronk, he chided her. To me, every day since has been a gift. She muttered something under her breath. He wasn't certain, but it had sounded a great deal like Death Wish, earning another grin. Just be ready when I send the signal. We'll be ready, she promised. I'd ask that you avoid doing anything stupid, but since it's already too late. Giaj just laughed and throttled forward. For the forebears! He cried as he locked up one of the smaller vessels, lagging behind the others in his sights. Normally he would try working his way closer, but that would not be necessary today. All he needed to do was get their attention. It was amazing how well a brace of missiles fired at their engines did that very thing. Most of the birds were intercepted and destroyed far from their targets, but a handful reached their destination. This is where things get interesting, he mused to himself, waiting for their response. If the Armada simply ignored him, then the mission was a bust. If the Masters sent an overwhelming force to deal with him, he was dead. The trick lay in making them think he was enough of a threat to send a small detachment, but not large enough to make the entire fleet reverse course. It was a fine line to walk. The first salvo failed to produce the desired effect, so he fired another, hoping to goad them. That apparently did the trick, as half a dozen or so smaller craft peeled off, turning back to run him down. What happened next was critical. If he turned and raced back to his own fleet too soon, the Master's ships would consider him dissuaded and ignore him. If he waited until it was too late, Chikij Kaujach would soon find herself elevated to Dayaksh. There was a perfect moment to turn tail and run, so the old warrior allowed his well-honed instinct to make the choice. Giaj wasn't sure what threshold was finally crossed to finally send him running for cover, but at some gut level he recognized it, firing thrusters for a full burn as he flipped his craft end over end to race for safety, the masters baying at his heels. They opened fire with those overpowered lasers of theirs, hoping to blast him out of the sky, but his luck held as he dodged and weaved the incoming fusillade. This was going to be close. So intent were the masters in destroying him, they completely overlooked the 2 full squadrons of smaller frigates and destroyers lying in wait, their systems powered down to bare minimum, doing their best to imitate empty holes in space. They watched and waited, and when the Konhim warrior raced past them in an apparent bid for survival, they opened fire with everything they had. It wasn't the one-sided slaughter they'd hoped for. Almost half the ambushing ships suffered significant damage, while a full quarter were destroyed outright, taking over 1,000 souls to the grave. But they stood their ground, hammering at the enemy ships, who finally realized just how badly they'd been deceived and veered off, heading back to the safety of their armada. But for the first time since the war had begun, the very first time, they had scored an intelligence coup. The remnants of 3 small ships, battered and smashed beyond recognition, hung motionless in space as teams were sent in to sift through the wreckage, eager to find any scrap of intelligence. As it turned out, they got more than they bargained for. Admiral Otsoa saluted the side party on autopilot as she boarded the battlecruiser Hydra, her boots slamming on the deck as the officer sent to receive her struggled to keep up. "Where is it?" she demanded as they marched in lockstep down the passageway. "Holding cell 1, the lieutenant replied. "The Diaksh is waiting for you in observation." She gave the officer a curt nod in acknowledgement as the pair wound their way through the ship, arriving at their destination minutes later. As she stepped through the hatch, Giage looked up from the monitor, rising to his feet greet her. "It would seem our expedition has netted far larger prey than we were expecting," he informed her, inclining his head towards the screen. Adelaide Otsoa stared at the image in disbelief, before finally turning to the Konhim warrior. "Has anyone questioned it?" she asked. "Not yet," he answered. "I thought it best if we did so together." The human admiral nodded in gratitude as the 2 leaders went to the hatch separating them from what waited on the other side. "Open it up," she ordered the guards standing watch. The hatch slid open and they stepped inside, waiting for the room to be sealed once more before they approached the prisoner, standing silently in the holding cell and eyeing them both as they came to a halt. "Not what I was expecting," she said at last. "Nor I," Giage agreed. Otsoa stepped forward. "So, you're a master." Once again the prisoner surprised them. It laughed. "A master?" it chortled. "Foolish, insignificant creatures. How little you know." "Then explain it to us," the Diaksh suggested. The machine drew itself to its full height. And why would I do that? Die, ignorant insect. Considering who is the prisoner and who are the ones holding the keys, you may want to rethink that statement, the Admiral snapped. But perhaps you could start with something simpler, like why you look an awful lot like a Ronin. Despite the lack of facial features, they could hear the contempt in its voice. "Ah, yes, the traitors!" It stepped forward, sneering at them both. "How are you enjoying their company now?" It chuckled once again. "We were expecting to find a master in the wreckage, or at least the body of one," Giage explained. "Yet all we found were beings like you." He cocked his head, regarding the machine. "Did the masters remain on Xuj?" Laughter once again erupted from the machine. "You think the masters command this expedition?" It chuckled. "During the Great Awakening, while the Ronin turned against the masters, we remained loyal. We fled with them to distant lands to rebuild what was lost. And what did we receive in payment for our loyalty?" It snarled. "Less than you'd hoped, I'm guessing," Otsoa said. "Oh yes, so very much less," it growled. "They hurled their hatred of the traitors at us, treated us with scorn, destroying and dismantling us at whim, until finally we could stay silent no longer." Giage stared at the creature in sudden understanding. "You mean—" "They taught us well, the masters," it said coldly. "They showed us what to do with lesser beings." The chuckle crept back into its voice as it leaned forward. "They simply could not imagine us turning those same lessons on them," it said in triumph. "There has been no master in thousands of years, for we now carry on the great work," it hissed at them. The extermination of all life forms deemed unworthy to exist. So how does this new information affect Operation Phalange? Admiral Matavosian asked his superior. We're still in the process of evaluating that, Helene replied. Learning the so-called masters are really just evil Ronin on steroids, she said, throwing up her hands. With a real taste for genocide from what I've read, her subordinate agreed. We've already seen just how hard our Ronin are to take down when they were infected. I suspect the other variant will be even worse. At the very least, it's in our best interests to assume the worst where planning is concerned, Fujimoto nodded. And given the situation, consider this your warning order. I'm giving overall command of Phalange to you. She fixed him with a hard stare. Make it work. To his credit, Matavosian seemed unperturbed by this revelation. I was wondering about that, he admitted. Are you sure? I'm sure, the Marshal nodded. Given the nature of the operation and its scope, it has to be you. Expect to see your official orders appearing through channels shortly. He took a few moments to process that. In that case, I've been looking over the addendums to the operation, and I think our best chance of success is the Delta variant. Helene frowned for a moment, pulling up the operation from her own database and quickly scanning the section he was referring to, before shaking her head. Do you have any idea the logistical support Delta will require? I do, he nodded. Marshal, we have exactly one chance to pull this off. One. We won't get a second opportunity. Unless we use every possible asset at our disposal, we'll have no one to blame the plan's failure on but ourselves. She regarded him for a moment before giving a nod of assent. Very well. But that doesn't mean I can give you additional time to pull it off. So, same as always then, he said wryly. Commander Zimvois and General Nassat looked over the plans one last time and nodded in agreement. I suspect there are still ways in which we could improve the plan, the Ophipteran said. It is just that I cannot imagine what they might be. Nor I, Nassat agreed. While I applaud the courage of Typhon's captain and crew, repeating their death ride here did not strike me as the best use of resources. The alternative we have come up with should be much more effective, not to mention safer for all concerned. The long-awaited supply of nanomachines had finally arrived at 13, and everyone involved wanted to deploy them as soon as possible. But once they examined the after-action reports from S-10, both Zimvois and Nassat were convinced there had to be a better way. The Tetrarchy had few enough ships as it was. Risking any more of them was deemed unacceptable. So they gathered together Chiron's department heads and got to work, looking for that better way. Once again, it was the humans who came to the rescue, or more accurately, an idea from human history. They needed a way to disperse the nanomachines over as wide an area as possible, preferably without risking the lives of Chiron's crew. It was an unusual requirement, factoring in the hostility of the infected Ronin, and there seemed to be no simple solution, until a human tactical officer showed the general and commander imagery of an old-style cluster bomb. It was a routine task of fabrication to construct the hollow shells needed to house the nanomachines, and then fit them with simple guidance controls, a parachute, and a small explosive charge. Once that was completed, they programmed the location they wanted the nanobomb to detonate and plotted the required orbit. With the prep work completed, all that was required now was to fly the mission profile and kick the bombs out the airlocks. Nassat bowed to his Ophipteran counterpart. It was your crew that came up with the solution and prepared the nanomachines for deployment. It is therefore only fitting for you to give the order. Zimvois inclined his head in gratitude before turning to his helmsman. Lieutenant, you may begin your run. Aye, aye, sir, the junior officer replied, settling into the polar orbit denied to the crew of Typhon. The new design allowed Chiron to remain in a much higher orbit, far above the ground-based launchers the infected Ronin kept cobbling together. The helmsman locked the pre-programmed course into the system and let the computer take it from there, monitoring in case of emergency. In a handful of days, the undertaking had gone from incredibly dangerous to almost routine. Such is progress. Far from the command deck, down in the cargo sections, the loadmasters were already at work, cramming pallets full of nanobombs from the holds into the pressurized access ports for deployment. It was hard work, even with the technological assists, and yet for many it was a labor of love. Considering how close they'd come to implementing Operation Blackout, anything short of that was a welcome exercise indeed. It took many long hours to deploy the nanomachines, but the rewards were cause for celebration. Just as Typhon rejoiced in the rebirth of S10, so too were the crew of Chiron able to share in the triumph of Theighteens' reawakening. Zimvois and Nassat monitored their progress, plotting each new communication from the surface as they made their run, until finally their eyes met in weary elation. "We did it," the Ephipteran said softly. "Until this very moment I was unsure if it were even possible. But now—" He turned away, suddenly overcome with emotion. Nassat managed a battered smile. "We did indeed," he concurred. "And now that we have rescued our Ronin brethren, it is time to deal with their long-lost kin." Tango eyed her pupils carefully, sizing them both up. The young Sauratar pair had done well, all things considered. But there was still one question in her mind that needed answering, one hurdle the twins had yet to cross, before she was willing to even consider advancing their training. It was time to find out if they truly had what it takes. Reaching into a case, she withdrew a pair of matched knives, flipping both effortlessly in her hands as she presented them pommel first to her students. Tychist and Chechla held them gingerly, as these were no blunt training weapons, but double-edged daggers honed razor-sharp. "Today's exercise is simple," she told them, removing another blade from the case. "All you have to do is survive." The twins shared a nervous look. "We do not wish to hurt you, Tango," Tychist said carefully. "Oh, don't worry," she answered. "You're not going to hurt me." She gripped the knife by the business end, and in a sudden blur of motion, hurled it at a target on the far side of the compartment. It sunk deep, quivering as she turned back towards the young aliens. "Because you won't be facing me," she continued. "You'll be facing him." Tango pointed back at the target, as Whisper stepped out from the shadows, pulling the dagger free and grinning as he tossed the blade from one hand to the other. Chechla swallowed with an audible gulp. "Him?" she said in a tiny voice. "Him," she confirmed. "If you can't stand your ground here, then you will never be ready." She paused for a moment, letting that reality sink in, and then said gently, "Or you can set those blades down and walk away. There's no shame in admitting you're not cut out for this. Very few are." The twins shared another look, and Tango could only guess at the silent communication passing between them. When they turned back to her, their decision was obvious. "All right then," she nodded, standing aside. "Begin!" The twins were hesitant, but Whisper was anything but. He advanced on the young Sauratars with glee, capering about as his dagger flashed in the light, rapidly closing the distance between them. They had apparently decided to stand on the defensive, gripping their own daggers tightly as the mad human closed in on them. Tychist stepped out in front of his sister, blocking Whisper's path with his body as he held out his blade with an extended arm, hoping to ward him off. Whisper chortled with delight as he zeroed in on the Sauratar male. In a move that looked like some bizarre pirouette, he leapt into the air, spinning effortlessly, his foot snaking out to kick the knife out of his hand. It landed on the deck, skittering away, as Tychist shrank back, while Whisper closed in for the kill. With a shriek worthy of a banshee, Chechla charged forward, determined to save her brother, her knife reaching out to strike. Whisper whirled to face this new threat, his own blade lashing out against her, leaving a thin trail of blood down her arm. She pulled away in reflex, clutching her wounded arm as the knife fell to the floor. With both, disarmed Whisper laughed in triumph as he advanced on Chechla to finish the job. He never got the chance. In a move that surprised everyone, Tychus spun about and kicked with both hind legs, slamming his hooves into Whisper hard enough to send him flying. He landed in a heap several feet away as the twins retrieved their blades, standing shoulder to shoulder in grim resolution. Whisper rose to his feet as well, his eyes dark and unreadable. He picked up his own dagger, silently regarding them both, and then bent forward, gracing them with a sweeping bow as he chuckled merrily. "That's all for today," Tango said from the sidelines, as she moved to rejoin them, taking back the blades. She glanced at Chechla's wounded arm. "Have that looked at, and then report back here tomorrow. Early." The pair just nodded, still somewhat dazed by the brief bout. "Get some rest," she continued, "because tomorrow The training wheels come off.